Hello folks, you alright? Can you all hear me in the back? Good, okay. Hello, welcome to Life as a Game Developer. As Kaz says, my name is Chris Hunter. I'm an environment artist for TT Games. Some of the games I've worked on, in 2011, I worked on a 6-week placement straight from uni to a handheld version of a remake of an arcade classic called Spy Hunter. And then just 4 short years, I managed to claw my way back into the industry and then worked on Lego Jurassic World. Now during this time, I was a junior construction artist, which is, they're the people who make, like in the Lego games, you have the real world stuff, and then you have the Lego items. And the Lego items are made by the construction artists. They make them and you smash them up and you rebuild them into other things. So that was my first position. I then went on to Lego Star Wars, The Force Awakens, which was an absolute dream come true because as a kid, I adored the Lego Star Wars games. I played them back to back, loved every single one of them. And yeah, it was just an amazing experience to get to work on that. But then after that, I moved to the Knutsford studio, which is TT Games, as an environment artist, where I worked on the Lego Dimensions series, working on the Mission Impossible game, Knight Rider, Gremlins, and then after that was Lego Marvel Superheroes 2, which I spent most of the time on the hub team there, because in the Lego games we have massive big hubs that you walk around and you do puzzles and you unlock other levels. That's what I was mainly doing for there. And then at the moment I'm working on the big daddy of them all, Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which I can't say any more about the game other than I'm working on it, but it's going to be good. So here's some examples of what I've done. This was actually the first ever environment I made professionally in a game. It's not the best environment in the world, but it was a start. And this is the IMF headquarters, which is based on the CIA headquarters from Mission Impossible. And then moved on to, I don't know if you can see this. Can you see the screen? It's quite dark. Yeah, anyway. There's a Chinese shop in there from the Gremlins. How many of you have seen Gremlins? Yeah, okay, good to know. Well, you'll know then the Chinese shop is where Gizmo, the little Mogwai, is bought from in the film. It's quite an iconic place. And it was quite an honor to be able to work on that scene. Now, because it was a scene within the hub of the game, it was quite difficult to, we basically have limited budgets when you're working with a hub. So you've got to keep everything quite low res, keep memory costs down, all that kind of stuff. So you've got to be creative with a very few items. So in this scene, there's not actually that many things in there, but they've had to be scattered about everywhere to give the illusion of being a fuller environment. And on the bottom's 3 examples of some of them. Then another example from Gremlins, this is the YMCA swimming pool, where Stripe, the bad boy Gizmo, the bad boy Gremlin, jumps in, duplicates and causes havoc everywhere. And this is actually the first time I ever managed to get a little Easter egg into a game. So, you know, if you look at the notice board and the swim pool here, you'll see a happy birthday message to my partner because it was her birthday. She hasn't seen it yet. I told her about it, she didn't really care, but I thought, well, thanks. And then Lego Marvel Superheroes, as I say, I was mainly on the hub for this one, so it was more in charge of fixing and optimizing things. And we made the big giant structures, the big buildings in Hydra, all that kind of stuff. But then I did actually get to do some other finer, smaller bits of art as well, which you can see here. They're just generic repeated assets like doors, handrails, radiators, and these are from the Sanctum Sanctorum, which is the Doctor Strange region of the game. And it's a very, very cool scene to work on because it's got that kind of Art Deco style to it, and I quite enjoyed that. So how I got into the industry, I did a few different things. One of the things I did was I worked as part of like an indie game group online called Abominators Games. It was just a group of guys, and girls, a group of people around the world all working on a game together via the internet. And it was quite a good experience because it gave me a way of working with other people as a team. It helped me understand why it was important to meet deadlines and all this kind of stuff. And the same thing happened with the uni course. I did game art at St. Helens College, but it was on behalf of Huddersfield University and John Moores University. So that helped me learn again about timekeeping. It helped me understand the reasoning for listening to feedback and trying to figure out what was going on. For example, up until my 2nd year at uni, I was pretty useless when it comes to listening to advice and to time management, and it really, really showed. I got pulled aside by my tutor at the end of the 2nd year, who said to me that, we know you've got something you can do, but we feel like you're not trying to your full potential. You can do better than this. And they had a proper sit down talk with me, 10-15 minutes, and it really truly opened my eyes to try and do better, try and be a better person in general. And it worked a treat because the next year I managed to finish the course with a first and whatnot, and it all worked out well in the end. But sometimes you just got to learn to take that advice and actually go with it, because they know what they're saying, the tutors, they really do know what they're doing. speaking of tutors knowing what they're doing, something I did after that, I actually worked as a teacher for a little bit. I was working at somewhere doing websites in a job that I didn't like. And my old tutor sent me an email saying to me that we need someone to cover the level 3 class, which is the one below the uni course. We need you to cover that for a couple of weeks if you don't mind, because we're trying to find someone to replace someone who just left. So would you be up for it? Because I thought you might be. And back then I was quite shy, quite reserved, and I'd already started applying saying thanks, but no thanks, it's not for me. I don't really fancy doing that, it's not my thing. And then I thought, you know what, sorry, no, I'm going to turn things around right now. This is the point where I change over. And so I deleted the email and I replied instead saying, yes, I'd love to, I'll give it a try. And it was a great decision because that 2-week cover that I was doing turned into a 3-year job. And before you know it, I'd seen 9 different classes through the course, and it was a fantastic experience, and it kept me in the loop. It kept me involved using 3D software every day, talking to people through processes and designs and all this kind of stuff. And it was really, really useful just to stay in the loop. And then something else that I did as well, like I said earlier, I applied for a slightly different position. Now, TT Games is quite unique in that they have construction designers or construction artists, whatever you want to call them. I think they're actually called gameplay artists now. But they're the people that make the Lego stuff that I talked about before. That's not a position you can apply for anywhere else. So I thought it was a good way of sort of getting into the industry because it's not a specifically high entry-level job. You know, it's an easier one to get into. It's not easy, but it's easier than getting into an environment art position, for example, which was the ultimate goal in the end. So yeah, I applied for that, and it really helped out. And eventually, from there, I could move on to environment art. So what do I do as an environment artist? Environment artist takes the scene that you're trying to recreate. So in the Lego games, it's a lot of real life locations, a lot of real IPs and films that exist. You're trying to turn that into a workable, playable environment. So that can involve a plethora of different jobs, from creating the 3D models to unwrapping them, texturing them, lighting scenes as on a whole, optimizing scenes, which is extremely important to get it all running properly on consoles, and then creating like tileable textures and that kind of thing, which can be part of the optimization as well. Now, all these roles are things that I do on a day-to-day basis. They're not all fun, but they are all equally important. So it's a really important thing to just bite the bullet and do every single thing that you need to do. I've known people in the past who are reluctant to do things like optimization, creating LODs, unwrapping things, but it's part of your job. If you're going to be an environment artist, you have to do all the things. So here's just some examples. So I would take a scene, I'd generate a block out, as you can see in the top left, then flesh out with a few more assets towards the middle, and then to the right you can see there's a slightly more finished variant. This is actually a personal scene I'm working on. It's Louis XVI's private library in the Palace of Versailles. It's not finished, like most things I make, but it's on the way. Now below is some of the assets you can see, so it's a plethora of different styles of things. I've got a chair kit that I use to make 3 different chairs throughout the scene, which kind of flesh it out a little bit. It's a good use of optimizing because I've got one texture for all 3 things, and they're dotted about. There's about 9 of them in the scene in total. There's standalone assets like the globe. There's tileable trim sheets, which is the gold bars you can see. Trim sheets are just repeatable textures that repeat one way, and you use them for skirting boards and railings and all that kind of stuff. One of the things I had to make for this scene was this Atlas figure that you can see. Now, I'm not a character artist, so as you can tell by the quality of that statue, but sometimes you've got to just do something outside of your comfort zone because the scene calls for it. You know, you can't just stop doing something because you say, oh, I don't do characters. Well, the scene needs a statue, so now you do. So that's what you've got to just bite the bullet again sometimes and do that. And then to the right of that is a tileable texture of the floor within that library, which is actually something I'm going to show you guys. Anybody who's on the workshop later for the Substance Designer one, that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at. But it's not all just pushing polygons. There's other opportunities within the industry I've just seen by some of the guys who've spoken already today. So what are the opportunities that are out there? There's many. There's environment art, like I've said, that's what I do. I've just shown you examples of that. There's concept art, which Sean was shown before. There's many, concept design. There's all sorts of different things you can do for that. There's character art, which is, character and vehicle art are pretty self-explanatory. There's QA, which is extremely important to be able to test and develop the games further from that. As Shaq said, from a design point of view, it's a really useful starting point as well. There's production, which without production, the game quite literally would never be finished because no artist ever is done with the scene. So it's important to have deadlines and things in place to make sure you don't run over, because that can get really expensive. That can be really bad, especially when you're working with IPs and other people's licenses. They do not like it when you're late. It's really not a good thing to annoy those people. And then there's design as well, and sound design, another extremely important element within the games. Way too often sound design, in my opinion, is overlooked in games. When it's there and when it's done right, it makes a heck of a difference. So just make sure that's something you know is out there as well. And of course, there's programming. Without programming, we literally couldn't make any of the games because the engines wouldn't run, the mechanics wouldn't work. So it's an extremely important element. And sometimes you just want to be involved in the games industry, but not actually be in the epicenter. And for things like that, you could be involved in things like games journalism, where you're still part of the whole family of game development. You're just not directly involved. So there's always options. There's many, many more things you can look at, but it's always good to know, you don't always have to be directly in the middle to be part of the process. So the important question, the million-dollar question, how do you get into the industry? One of the best things you can do is actually get involved. So it's important to try and become part of the community that you're trying to join. That can be done through many different ways. So from an environment art point of view, or a character art point of view, or basically an art in general point of view, things like Polycount and ArtStation are invaluable. ArtStation a bit more so these days, I think, but Polycount is a brilliant forum where you can go, you can post your work, you can get feedback, you can speak to industry professionals, industry veterans. They can all give you advice and stuff, and you can even collaborate with people on there, start projects, do competitions. There's plenty of stuff you can do. ArtStation is basically like a Facebook for artists. It's kind of a portfolio site, but there's also a great place for tutorials, a great place to see other industry professionals, people you admire and look up to. For example, there's substance designer users like Josh Lynch and Daniel Tiger, who I really admire, and their work is on there, and they do exceptional stuff, really, really inspirational things. And you can comment on it, say, I really like this, how did you do such a thing? And they can get back to you and let you know. So it's super useful. You can start your own blog. It's another function within ArtStation if you didn't want to do your own on WordPress or anything like that. But it's important to keep a blog, keep yourself, keep a record of what you've been doing over time, and you can see your progression. For example, I found my blog from uni a couple of months ago, and I almost wanted to just delete it on site because it should be burnt and never seen again. But it's important to know that you've got that opportunity to look back at your work and see where you've come from there. There's YouTube, which again, the same kind of thing with ArtStation. You can get involved with people doing work on there, showcasing the stuff, leave comments on it and whatnot. And there's also real life things like game meetups and game jams. Now meetups, there's actually an app I didn't know about until recently I think it's called Meetups. And it'll show you where in your area there's game development meetups. So for example, there's one in Warrington every month, which I haven't been to yet, but I mean to go to at some point. They're very useful for networking, for meeting up with people who are in the industry now, who are people who are currently where you're trying to be. And you can go speak to them for advice. When you go there though, please don't sort of go there as sort of in fanboy mode, if you know what I mean. People don't like that. Just speak to them, ask them questions. It's completely fine to do. Just try not to be sort of overbearing and overpowering. And then the game jams, obviously, really, really important. It teaches you a great thing about sticking to deadlines, about working as a group, and about just having your work and focusing on that as an individual task. So this slide next, it's pretentious and it's in Japanese, but that's how it is. It says, Chirimo tsumoreba yamato to naru, which means even dust and piled up becomes a mountain. And what I mean by that is it's an old proverb about language learning and stuff like that, but it works for anything really. If you're an artist or if you're trying to develop any kind of skill, pick up little bits here and there. Any information you can pick up is going to help build that mountain that will eventually become your professional skill. So it's important to just keep adding small little things over time. It might not feel like you're making much progress, but you really are. You're making as much progress as you need to be making. So just keep at it, and that's the most important part of it. So like I said, never stop learning. There's a plethora of free resources out there, paid for resources, whatever you might need. There's everything that you can do to help yourself learn and improve as an artist, as a creative, as whatever discipline it is you're trying to get into. So there's things like YouTube for tutorials, Pluralsight, which used to be Digital Tutors. It's a paid for service, but it's, in my opinion, the best one. There's things like lynda.com as well, which has just become LinkedIn Learning. There's plenty of things that are paid for also. Polycount, as I said earlier, even though it's a forum, there's a massive wiki on there with tutorials that span back years and years. Some of them might be slightly outdated these days, but because it's a forum, you can ask for advice from people for current versions of them. Again, ArtStation, even though it's more like a portfolio sharing site, there's a ton of really, really good tutorials on there as well. And you can create your own collections on there. So if you find something that you like, you can add it to a collection. For example, I've got one called tutorials. It's really, really useful. If you're just trying to think, where did I see that little tip? Where did I see that example of something that I'm trying to achieve? You can go look in your collections and find it there. There's Twitch as well, which is a weird one, but people live stream game development and tutorials on Twitch. And that is kind of a unique beast because you get people like Dynasty on there who do monthly streams and they do feedback, portfolio feedback reviews on there as well. And the best thing about it being live streamed on Twitch is that you can ask advice then and there and they can answer you on the spot. So it's really, really useful if there's something you're specifically stuck on and you can't really figure out how to phrase it for Google, or you're not sure, you're having no luck with articles or anything like that, you can go speak to them on Twitch and get your answer straight away. And there's also 80 Level, which is an exceptional website. It's really good for articles and tutorials and walkthroughs and all sorts of stuff like that. I think that's primarily aimed at environment art, but then again, that's what I primarily use it for. So it could have plenty more on it that I just don't see. But it's another recommended, a recommended resource. So one thing that I heard a long time ago, which is, it's kind of cheesy, but it kind of rings true, is that I think it was a master doing fundamental drawing art as like a masterclass thing. And he was saying about, if you imagine a giant stack of papers next to you is what you'll achieve throughout your life as an artist or as a creative, as a whatever it is you're doing. The very bottom piece is your masterpiece. That is the best thing you'll ever achieve. But there's this massive stack of papers on top of it. And in order to get to that, you've got to work your way through. So every single sketch that you do is getting you a step closer to what you're trying to achieve. And it's the same thing with this, with tutorials. You may not feel like you're getting anywhere, but you are. Slowly you're working through each one of those drawings, each one of those models, each one of those designs. You're getting through it and you're working to the best ones, which will be at the end, because you've got all of this built up resources that you've used. Another thing to do to get into the industry is just do the thing. So it's important to try and do some development at home. These days, there's not really any excuse not to. There's a lot of free engines out there, free resources for you to learn to use these. So Unreal Engine 4, for example, is one of the industry standards right now, and it's an exceptionally powerful tool. It's free for you guys to use and to learn from. And if you apply for a job and you've got a link to a finished project, that looks really, really good. That shows that you've seen the whole thing beginning to end, you've seen every angle of the pipeline, and you understand the process, which helps a lot when it comes to job applications, because it just means there's a little bit less for them to have to show you when you start. A bit less work for somebody. That might make them a bit more inclined to hire you because you're prepared. So there's a list here of free engines, free resources for development now. The UE4, Unity, Lumberyard, Stencil, CryEngine, and Godot, which I've never heard of, but I looked up and it seems pretty cool. So yeah, they're not all 3D. I think Stencil is mainly a 2D one, but that's quite simple to use. These aren't just for art. You can use these for programming, for design, whatever you need to use them for. They're there for the whole gamut of things. And so another important thing to do whilst you're doing all this, even though it is important to never stop learning, please try and avoid burnout. This is a major, major issue that a lot of people overlook until it's too late. I can speak from experience. Burnout is not good for you. It's not good for anyone around you. But it's important to look after your health when you're doing your studies, when you're doing your development, because you can't improve if you've made yourself ill with stress and overwork. It doesn't work that way. If you're stressed out and you're fully drained, you can't absorb anything new. You can't improve as a person. So look after your health, both physical and mental. A lot of people don't look after the mental health enough. If you need a break, have a break. It's not going to kill you, but it might if you don't. Go for a walk. Just have a minute off. Don't look at any screens. Don't think about anything to do with the development. Just give yourself half an hour, and you'll find it's really surprisingly refreshing when you come back to your work and you can think of something new and something exciting that wasn't there before because you're simply too tired to see it. Play some games, get some inspiration. I know I said look away from the screens, but this is when you're back. Yeah, play some games, get some inspiration. Just try and remind yourself why you're trying to get into this industry, why you're trying to develop what you're developing. Because it's so easy sometimes to lose inspiration and to lose the drive as to why you're trying to do this. But just stick with it and have a hobby. So for example, I make, it's kind of geeky, but I make little plastic robot models called Gundam. It's like Japanese figures. They're fun to make. They take my mind off stuff, but it's still being creative because I'm kind of in love with creation in general, just creativity. Whatever I do in my spare time tends to be towards something creative because it's what I like to do. So try and be creative in other ways. For example, I learn Japanese in my spare time. I do like a weekly podcast to think nothing to do with game development, just completely my own rambling nonsense, and it's a good way of just turning off for half an hour every week to make sure that is a slot where I don't need to think at all about game development. And another really, really important thing, especially when it comes to applying for jobs and applying for work, is just never ever give up. Keep posting your work, keep updating your portfolio, because now is the time to do it. I wish I had time in my spare time now to work more on my portfolio, because the stuff that's on there isn't great, but there's not much I can do about that right now because I don't have time to work on much at home. When you do work on your portfolio and you do post to forums, make sure you're listening to the feedback that people are giving you. It is an invaluable resource. Now, I can understand as creatives we're kind of egotistical sometimes, and you think, oh, I don't need to listen to you. I've seen the light. This is the way it should be. That's not always the case. It's hardly ever the case. But at the same time, don't listen to all feedback. Some people might just be chipping in. Sometimes it's just not the right thing, or sometimes someone's misinterpreted what the project is. So yeah, listen to feedback, try and take most of it on board. And don't take the feedback, don't take the feedback personally, because it's not aimed at you as a person. It's purely objective, based on the art that they can see, based on the program that they're running, whatever it is. Just don't take it personally. It's about the project. And also expect and accept rejections. There could be many of them, which sounds like kind of a negative point, but it's not. This industry is extremely competitive. There's a lot of positions, but there's a lot more people. So sometimes it's not going to work out the first time. Just keep at it, keep applying. One thing that I did which really, really helped is I kept my I kept my applications organized. So whenever I was applying for a job, I had a spreadsheet that I used, and it had on it the name of the company I was applying for, what position, who I spoke to, what email address I spoke to them via, what date I spoke to them, and then I had a chase up box of what date I should chase them up next, and a status, if it's complete, it's in progress, or it's failed, you know. Now when I say chase them up, I don't mean send an email every day. Did you get it? Have I got the job? You know, what's going on? Don't do that, that's really bad. Wait a couple of weeks, a month maybe, and just send them a polite email saying, I'm just double checking you did get my application, because this is a genuine thing. Sometimes when you send an email, it's got an attachment with it, it goes straight in the spam filter. Some places are set up that way. So if you've sent them a separate email without attachments saying, just double checking you got that last one, then they'll know, oh, actually, no, I didn't, can you resend it? Sometimes that happens. But just keep on top of it, keep yourself organized. It's really, really important thing to do. And yeah, another thing, it's kind of cheesy, but something I tend to live by these days is the only way to guarantee failure is by not trying. So if you think to yourself, oh, I'm not going to apply for that company, they'll never have me because I've always admired that game, and that's, you know, way too good for what I can do. Try. You don't know until you try, and the only way you can guarantee you're never going to get that job is if you don't apply for it. So just keep with it, keep it up, and don't ever stop trying. So thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions? And it can be about the photograph if you want. Yeah? So how do I recognize I'm getting to burnout? If you realize that you're starting to really get distracted quite easily, if you're feeling constant pressure on yourself, that's usually you getting towards the end of the candle wick. Usually it's time to just step away for a minute. Sometimes it could be a couple of days of just turn it off. Also, you have to look at your project scale. If you're trying to do something that's way too adventurous for yourself, for example, I did this in my third year at uni. I had a pretty serious burnout, like practically a breakdown, because I gave myself about 6 people's worth of work to do, and that's not a good idea. I learned that the hard way. It's really not a good idea. Stick to what you know. Try and add a bit more to it that makes you slightly uncomfortable. But yeah, if you start to find yourself being irritable and sort of cranky towards people that you normally wouldn't be, then you're probably heading that way. So give yourself a rest. That's the best advice I can give for that. Okay. Any more questions? Yeah. Sorry, hang on a sec. Hey. Oh yeah. Sorry, just a sec. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, what advice would I give for people to see the personal projects through till the end? Is stay organized, like what Shaq was saying. Things like Trello and stuff like that is what I use to try and make sure I've got everything laid out that I need to do. That way I can be realistic with my deadlines that I've set for myself. Because what I used to do is say to myself, oh, I've got, I'll give myself a month. I can make a scene in a month. Seems reasonable. But then when you actually lay it all out, you think, okay, what do I need? So from an art point of view, what do I need? What assets do I need? What textures do I need to make? You allocate time to each one, a slightly realistic time, which is always, like, try and overdo it by like a third. So say if something normally takes you, 6 hours, give yourself 8, just to try and give yourself that space to work with it. And then be realistic with the deadline. So once you've added all them together, you might realize, actually, this is a 2-month project. And at that point, you either start to take stuff out to optimize your time, or you just accept that it's going to take 2 months and that's how long it is. But if you don't have 2 months to do it, then start taking stuff out, start optimizing what you're doing. Is that okay? Yeah. Any more? Yeah, oh, sorry guys. Sorry, good exercise. Okay.
So when you're trying to find jobs, how do you find those jobs essentially?
Okay, so when you're looking for work, how do you find who's got jobs available? Is that what you're asking, basically? The best way to do that, let's see, how did I do that? I looked around at jobs. I looked where I wanted to work first. So I was looking in the local area. I looked up what studios are here. So there's websites like Game Dev Map, and I think it's GameSmith Dev Map as well, which I slightly prefer because it shows you visually where things are. They have resources of local companies available. And there's also, obviously, there's job listing sites, there's recruiters on LinkedIn and that kind of thing. But I find jobs that are available aren't always posted. Sometimes they're still in the internal phase. So it's usually worth it if you've got something you want to apply for, a kind of position that you're aiming at. You can always apply at local companies and see if anything comes back. And if nothing comes back, they might at least keep you on record for a bit. So, for example, I think when I applied at TT, they had nothing at the time, and they kept me on the record for like 6 months and then called me back later on. And so that can happen that way as well. But yeah, mainly look at like games websites and recruiters on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. Okay, is that everything? Great, all right, thank you very much, guys.